Hello everybody. So this is the first video in a series of videos I'll be doing where I break down how I design and make my knives. So today's focus is profiles, and then lines and pin placement and facets. So full disclaimer here that I've been drawing for most of my life and I'm fairly decent at it. I know not all of you will be. So I would really recommend using a ruler, which I use all the time, and you can also use French curves, which are just different radii that help you get some nice curves and flow into your designs. However, the tips that I will be discussing will hopefully give you a good foundation regardless of what you use. So in terms of inspiration, I take inspiration from a few things. I look at other knives mostly. I sometimes also look at art, animals, architecture, and sometimes people take inspiration from bikes and cars and things like that. So with that said, from here on out I will be mostly talking about kitchen knives, and mostly just the standard Yuto chef's knife style, as that's what I make the most of. On that note, there are three primary styles, and this is a big generalization, but there you go. The first is German, which usually has a very large belly that starts early and a tip that is usually between the middle of the handle and the spine. This affords it a good ability to rock chop. French, which has a larger flat spot at the back and a tip that is usually aligned between the middle of the handle and the underside of the handle. This is designed more to rock and glide and to do push cuts, which are straight up and down towards the heel. And finally, Japanese knives, which usually have a tip aligned below the underside of the handle and a longer flat area up the back for slicing and push cutting. You can also see that the spine is normally somewhat raised rather than horizontal to the cutting board like the German and the French. In terms of handles, there's kind of three major types, again a generalization, but we have Western handles, which are often curvy. We have Japanese wa handles, which can be octagonal or D-shaped or various different other forms, and then we have hybrids of those, which are basically Western profile with facets. And then there's other variations in many different styles, for example something along this line where you have a singular finger choil here. Overall, my preference is mostly for French and Japanese style blades, with any style handle you can see here, Western and a hybrid. Talk with your customers, or yourself of course, and see what you want to make and what it will be used for. With that background you'll have a good idea of what the profile needs to incorporate. Now we just need to connect the dots. The other thing that influences your design parameters are equipment and materials. For example, if you have a bar of steel, you will need to fit your blade into that profile of the bar, unless you're forging. And also in terms of equipment, I use this small wheel attachment to grind these radii here. Of course I could use a file, although that's slower, and a Dremel tool, or any other kind of rotary tool, but I do need to account for that in my design. If you heat treat as well, there can be a length limitation with that as well. So those are the things to consider. Once you have all of that, you can then get on to designing your knife. Here I'm drawing a French style blade with a Western handle. You can see that I find my angles for the blade and the handle with a ruler. I draw a horizontal line to act as a sort of chopping board to base the angles off of, and then I draw the line for my spine, finding my maximum blade width, which is 5 centimeters. I like to have an angled spine where the handle is slightly above horizontal with the board. This is personal preference, but I find it adds some nice visual and practical taper to the blade, adds knuckle clearance, and makes the knife look sleeker and prettier. Your handle needs to start in alignment with your spine as well. It can't be off like either of these two for it to look nice. You can curve your handle down towards the back, but it does need to start in alignment with your spine. And in my opinion also, the spine of the handle should only be strongly curved if the blade is also strongly curvy as well. After that, I then draw in the tip of my knife. French tips generally start curving down from the spine at or a little after halfway down the blade, whereas Japanese usually start a little later, often in the last third to a quarter. This curve will usually be exponential, meaning it gets curvier the closer it gets to the tip. Here I'm doing a French curve. Then I measure the length of the handle and draw in a curved butt, and curve the end of the handle down to match the curve in the blade. Handles are normally going to be somewhere between 11 and 12 centimeters for small blades, 12 to 13, 14 for medium blades, and then larger for larger blades. However, I do make handles on the small side, so if you and your customers prefer, do make them larger. French blades normally have a flat spot up the back for the first third or half of the blade, so I'm taking that and then curving it up appropriately to the front, taking my total blade length, and then I'm doing a nice Coke bottle handle, checking my equipment, and matching that choil down to the heel. After drawing the outline, I cut it out and stick it on some MDF sheet. I then profile it on my grinder and make a template. This allows me to see if it fits my equipment and my materials and how it feels in the hand. I then paint the template black and hold it up to the light. This allows me to get a good look at how nice the lines look with none of the distractions. Here you can see that this Kingmaker model went through a few different templates before I found the correct one for me. So this one, I liked the curves, but I found in use that this middle rise here was a little bit too pronounced and it dug into the middle finger. So what I did, and what I would recommend you do in your designs, is have the apex of that curve 2 fingers space away from the front of your handle, so that it goes in between your second and third finger. The same is true for faceted handles like this. You have 2 fingers there. So use your templates once you've made them. Do rock chopping, do the slicing actions that you want to do. Notice if the tip looks too wide, or if certain things are off. Is it comfortable? If your knife is comfortable just as a 4mm thick sheet, then it's going to be very comfortable if you make a nice handle. So once I have a profile that I'm happy with and that's comfortable, I'll chuck it back on the paper, trace around it, and then I can spend some time dialing in some of the details, such as plunge lines, facets, and pin placements too. Now to start on the details, I will be talking about a few different small aspects of the profile that I couldn't fit very well into the discussion previously. So the first is your ricasso, which is this flat spot between the handle and the blade. Now, in my opinion, this ricasso should be in line with the lines of the handle. So we already established that you want your spine to be straight with your handle. The other thing you want is the bottom of this ricasso to be in alignment. And you can see here that this ricasso being off throws this whole handle off, even if it meets in the same point. On a full tang like this, what we're looking for is a smooth continuous curve that flows into the curves of the handle without any breaks. This is personal preference, and some people won't, but I feel that unless you have a wah handle, then any curve or misalignment can look very off. I believe that your handle should have a streamlined flow with your ricasso. On hidden tangs, your ricasso is normally narrower by a fair margin than your handle. However, the lines should still flow, even though it is narrower. The next thing with the profile that I couldn't quite touch on before is the choil. Now the choil is this section here, which is also referred to as the heel. Right here, I feel that this choil should curve in. You can have it straight, however this curve in allows you both to not nick your finger as easily, and also makes it easy to wipe it with a tea towel and not catch it on a sharp hook. You can have it straight, as I was saying, but I would recommend not having it facing backwards, as that's very aggressive and will dig into your fingers and your tea towels and make a mess of everything. Now onto the actual details. First we'll cover plunge lines. I do plunge lines on my knives. You can blend it into the ricasso and avoid it, and that's all good. If you want to do a plunge line though, there's not too many rules on where it should go. You can have it right up against the choil here, or right up against the handle, or anywhere in between. I prefer to have it kind of halfway to somewhere near the choil myself, but that's personal preference. This plunge line should match your handle, at least on full tangs. Here you can see where the handle scales and the plunge line don't match, and it leaves this area looking very empty and strange. It breaks the cohesion between the blade and the handle. Here you can see the plunge line that matches, and this could be further away. I've just drawn it close, but you can see that the angle of the bolsters roughly matches the angle of the plunge line. That adds a lot of cohesion and makes the whole thing flow. Here you can see a selection of knives where the plunge line matches the handle. So we've got a faceted one, we've got a western one, and then we have a straight full tang. Now you can see that on a knife with a plunge line that is roughly perpendicular, or at 90 degrees, to the spine of the knife, and also has this ricasso that goes all the way down to the edge, it's less particular about what angles you use, as opposed to something like this or that. For some reason, hidden tangs seem to be a little bit less finicky about this, so you can get away with different angles, as you can see on this top one. However, the bottom one does have better cohesion, because that plunge line matches more closely with the front of the bolsters. So while it's not essential, even on a full tang as well, it is a nice touch that can go a long way to making cohesion in your piece. So with that, we then draw a nice front of our scales and a plunge line to match, and now it comes to pin placement. And I've discovered a pretty cool trick for this. What you do is you take the narrowest point of your handle front and back, and then you mark halfway and connect the dots staying pretty parallel to the spine. This is the line that your pins go on. And you can see, as I draw it onto the blade, that when it gets to the point where the spine starts curving down, it gets closer to the spine. You can see here what I refer to as the true handle. So this extra belly and curve here is an outlier. And just like in stats, you don't want an outlier skewing your data. You want everything to be in the correct alignment. So, if I was to take a central pin on this handle and put it in there, that fits well. However, if I take that line away and I put it in the center, you can see that it suddenly looks off. It curves down. So we want to follow that true line. Don't let outliers skew your data. In terms of how far back along the handle, on Western knives, if I'm doing 3, which I pretty much never do, I like to have one roughly the narrowest point up the back, or nearby, one in the center between the front and the back, and one roughly the same distance from the front. This one's a little close. On a faceted handle, if I'm doing pins, I'll normally have one in the center, and then anything you're doing either side of those lines you want to mirror, if possible, so I would do a pin up the back on either side. If I'm doing bolsters, I'll normally have one about 1 centimeter behind the front spacer, and in that same position up the back. So now we go back to that design I was doing before. You can see that I find the rough length I want my pinch grips to be, the apex of that pinch grip follows the line, and then I draw in my spacers, accounting for their thickness, and then I'll use that line to find my pin placement, roughly 8 mils to 1 centimeter back, and then roughly the narrowest point of the handle, and then I'll just erase all of the extra lines that I don't need, so that I can check if I like the proportions, and I do. So to prove to you that this wasn't just a fluke based on that one design, I'm now doing the same thing with a hybrid-handled Japanese-style blade. So again, I take the narrowest point of the handle, front and back, and then I connect the dots parallel with the spine, extend that out into the blade. Now this is going to give me not only the foundation for my pin placement, but also my facets, because this is going to be a faceted handle. And you can see already that this gives me the foundation for the meeting point of the front of my scales, which is going to flow cohesively with the faceted handle having a faceted front. Then I get a simple pin placement about 1 centimeter back, and I'm also going to do pins up the back, perimeter pins, one on either side to have cohesive visual balance. Having symmetry on either side of that central line is really important. So you can see here that just a singular facet without balance on the other side can look a little bit weird, except in the instance of a wah handle where you have this kind of cross section. That can look good because it's quite a simple handle, but something like this, just a singular facet on the bottom or on the top, leaves the remainder of the space looking very empty. So I would suggest when you do have something going on one side of that central line, then try and balance it on the other side. So here I'm doing the facets for that knife, and you can see that at the front they are roughly parallel, equal distances from that central line, and then they flare out to different degrees based on their perimeters. And then that underside back facet is roughly at or above that central line. Now this is really comfortable, and I would encourage you to do that if you are going to have a large facet up the back, have it match or be close to that central line, or at least have some of that balance that I was talking about earlier. Now you can see that there are millions of different ways to facet, so don't be held into any boxes. Here are just some examples of what can be done. But the world is your oyster, so pick and choose, experiment, see what feels comfortable. So, with all that said, we have the two knives that I designed during this video, my Kingmaker model and my Vespa model. And you can see that despite being very different blade and handle styles, with this being faceted hybrid, and this being a Western, and a French, and a Japanese blade, you can see that those same ideas with that central line, the blade being in line with the handle, the pin placement being based on that central line along with the facets, and the plunge line matching the front of the scales, you can see that we have ended up with quite a nice pair of knives. So hopefully this video has been helpful and maybe even entertaining to you, and hopefully it helps you make nice knives.